Uh, oh goodness, there's actually five Fort Edmontons.
Yeah, I think this is the first one.
The very first one was 1798, I think. It was actually built out towards Fort Saskatchewan. And
Wow,
was
so it's more out there.
Yeah, so it's more out there. And what would sort of happen over time is either a spot wasn't a good trading spot, or they would run out of kind of resources, because just to heat the place, they were cutting down lots of trees, and so you run out of trees in the nearby area, and so they'd move after a while. So
one was flooded, right? I think.
yeah, so like the first one was there, the second one was down kind of where the Rossdale power plant is, and then that one supposedly flooded, so they moved away from there towards, I've been told, Little Smoky. I think that's more like Smoky River or something like that. I think that the people who said Little Smoky are incorrect, but maybe they are. It was so far out of the way that nobody was coming to trade with them. So like, not a bad spot. There's lots of trees and things, but nobody's coming to trade. So then they came back. Fort Edmonton was again on the Rossdale Flats. They forgot that the second one, or the first one there, had flooded. It flooded again, and then they built it up where the legislature is, was the fifth one. Which, if you go to Fort Edmonton Park, the fort they have there is a recreation of that fifth one.
But just lower down.
Yeah, and on the totally wrong side of the river.
Yeah, so I know
Because technically, the south side of the river was the settlement of Strathcona versus Edmonton. So it wasn't until sometime in the early 1900s when they amalgamated that even the south side was Edmonton. This used to be Strathcona, and was a totally different community place altogether.
Okay, who runs Fort Edmonton?
Well, it's run by the Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah.
Is sort of the general thing. If you're looking,
Like
probably the most well-known chief factor, the one that I would know the most about, because when I worked at the fort, I knew all about what was going on in 1846. The kind of the most famous chief factor would be John Rowland. He ran Fort Edmonton for quite a long time, and it was under him that Fort Edmonton was actually the most successful fur trading post west of Winnipeg. And it was Edmonton basically became the capital, or not really capital because they didn't call it that, but it was the most important fort in the Saskatchewan district. So it was before we had province and stuff. This area was the Saskatchewan district, and Fort Edmonton was kind of the hub for that.
How come?
There's a number of reasons for that. One was just we were the most successful fort, and John Rowland made this his home base, and it's where any other people that would be part of the company, like John Simpson, who is kind of head of the company at the time when he'd come through, he'd stay at Fort Edmonton. So, but Fort Edmonton's got there's a bunch of reasons, and part of it, like John Rowan recognized that this area was a good place to have Fort Edmonton, because it was, it's one of the only spots along the North Saskatchewan River for hundreds of miles where you can actually cross, where there's low sides on both edges. Otherwise, it's for hundreds of miles you can't cross the river. So if you're, regardless of which side you're on, you're otherwise only trading with half as many people because you can't cross the river. So that's a huge thing. This area is a natural. It was a meeting place previously for Aboriginal people. It's been known as Pehonin, which is a word which in Cree means a gathering place. And so Cree people were gathering here for thousands of years. In fact, there's some unpublished scholarship which suggests that there's a road through Edmonton called Old Fort Road, and it's actually on the south side, that it still exists today, and you would take that road down the hill to an area across the river, go up to the fort. But that road is believed to have existed during the Ice Age, and it was one of the ways that people would travel from essentially like the Arctic all the way down to Mexico, and that road has been traveled for probably 11,000, 12,000 years, and so this place has always been a natural gathering place for people. And so John Rowan was like, let's build a fort here, because rather than getting people to come to us, let's go to where they already are, and that's a big part of it. It's also, if you look at your regions of Alberta, like they all kind of collide around Edmonton, and your watersheds also, like we've got the North Saskatchewan River which leads to the Hudson's Bay, but if you go a little while west to Jasper, you can get to rivers that'll take you out to the Pacific Ocean. If you go a little bit north, you hit the Athabasca River, which will take you up to the Arctic Ocean. And so you have access in terms to everywhere. And so in terms of access to like, markets and the furs, especially the furs from up north, which are going to be the thickest furs, which is what they want, having access to all those kind of things is huge. So all those kind of things help combine to be why Fort Edmonton would be such a successful spot.
Who were the First Nations did they trade with? Or what First Nations?
The main groups around here at the time of Fort Edmonton would be the Cree and the Blackfoot. There would be some other as well, and the Blackfoot we should recognize as being like the Blackfoot Confederacy at that point, which is a group of numerous sort of nations, which includes the Blackfoot or the Siksika as well as others.
Yeah, I remember reading about this.
Yeah. And so, it's funny, we refer to them as the Blackfoot, but the Blackfoot was probably one of the smaller groups actually within the whole Confederacy. So we trade naturally with them. Had Fort Edmonton been here like a few hundred years before, they probably would have traded with less Cree, but the Cree through 1700s actually moved west as populations were expanding out east. They moved west, and so this area became sort of Cree territory by the time that anybody was out here for trading. So the Cree were the main people that they were trading with. And as I say, there'd be some Blackfoot, and you'd get some people from all over the place because it is a trading spot and it is a gathering place, but those would be your main groups.
Okay. What did they like buy and sell mostly?
Most of what they wanted was furs, and the most important fur was the beaver fur as far as wealth goes. The beaver furs would be made into fancy top hats back then, and the beaver fur hats that they had, like they're not like Davy Crockett hats. Yeah. They're like your fancy top hats, and the average person working at Fort Edmonton would not make enough money in their lifetime to be able to buy one of those hats. They were crazy expensive. They'd be sort of equivalent to somebody nowadays buying themselves a Ferrari or something, where it's just like crazy amounts of wealth to buy one of these hats. But it was your ultimate kind of symbol of like, I'm a rich, important person over in Europe. And so those hats were worth a lot. So the beaver furs, because beaver fur, it felts really well to make into that. It's sort of naturally waterproof, so your hat's stained waterproof and things like that. And so that was the main thing. But they would trade for any number of furs. Fort Edmonton also, it's worth noting, was a meat fort as well as a fur fort. And so it actually made a lot of the pemmican and meat that would be part of the rations for men, not just in Fort Edmonton, but for a bunch of the surrounding forts. So they supplied meat. So as a result of that, Fort Edmonton's also like the smelliest fort around because they're doing all the meat processing and all of that sort of stuff. But you'd get several pounds of meat a day. I think you got like 8 pounds of meat a day, something silly like that, to have. And I think it was like you got either 8 pounds of fresh meat or like 4 pounds of pemmican. Most people would go for the pemmican because it'll last longer. But you got that every single day. So there's a need for that. So Fort Edmonton was trading was certainly trading for meat as well, and they would trade for other furs because it's the Industrial Revolution. They'll make things into anything. Like a skunk tail can be made into a paintbrush, and buffalo hides, their skins are nice and thick. They're great for conveyor belts and things like that. They would make, or belts and machines and things like that. So they would trade for just about anything, but the beaver was their main concern for sure.
Okay. Who were their rivals?
As far as rivals, there was the Northwest Company as far as a rival.
Like a French
sort of
Northwest.
Yeah.
Around them.
In the 1820s, though, they amalgamated, and so by the time you're in like 1822, you don't actually have any rivals at all. They basically have a monopoly. They don't have any enemies. A lot of people look at the forest and they think, these huge walls are obviously to keep out enemies and things like that. It's like, no, they're to keep out bears and wolves and things because we got a bunch of meat in here. It would be bad business to like make enemies with people, really. They're in the early fur trade days, they're really trying to be friendly with everybody that they can be, because that's how you build up business relationships. And in fact, the Hudson Bay Company, one of the unique things about it that other companies didn't necessarily do was they started to actually encourage the men to marry some of the Aboriginal women and such. In fact, they made it that men couldn't bring out their wives with them. So it was only men out here. And so men would get lonely if they want to have a wife. It's got to be someone Aboriginal. But they did that to, again, strengthen trade relations and things like that. So, which was kind of smart. But yeah, so they didn't, by the 1820s, they essentially had no rivals. They had a monopoly. And there's very little conflict. Prior to that, Northwest Company